He handed the alien girl a towel, but her reaction rendered him speechless. The rain hammered against the metal roof of the outpost as Jake wiped condensation from the window. 3 months into his assignment at the remote research station on Kepler 442b, the isolation had begun to wear on him. The planet was beautiful in its alien way, with crystalline formations that sang in the wind and bioluminescent forests that painted the night sky in ethereal blues and purples. But beauty could not replace human contact, and Jake found himself longing for the simple pleasure of conversation with someone who understood sarcasm. The distress beacon had been weak, barely registering on the station's sensors. Jake had almost dismissed it as interference from the planet's magnetic storms. But something about the signal pattern nagged at him. It was too regular, too purposeful to be natural phenomena. Against protocol, he decided to investigate alone. The beacon led him to a crash site 2 kilometers from the station, where twisted metal and strange organic compounds lay scattered across the rocky terrain. She was barely conscious when he found her trapped beneath a section of what appeared to be a bio-mechanical hull. Her skin was pale blue with intricate silver patterns that seemed to shift and flow like liquid mercury. Her eyes were large and luminous, a deep violet that seemed to hold galaxies within them. She was humanoid, but clearly not human. Her limbs were longer and more graceful than any human, and her features held an otherworldly beauty that made Jake's breath catch in his throat. Jake had worked the wreckage for nearly an hour before he managed to free her. She was unconscious by then, her breathing shallow and labored. He carried her back to the station through the driving rain, her slight form surprisingly light in his arms. The medical bay was equipped for human injuries, but Jake did his best to assess her condition. She had several lacerations and what appeared to be a broken arm, but nothing that seemed immediately life-threatening. When she finally awoke 2 days later, her eyes fixed on Jake with an expression of pure terror. She scrambled backward until she hit the wall of the medical bay, her injured arm clutched protectively against her chest. She spoke in a language Jake had never heard before, her voice melodic despite her obvious distress. The universal translator in the station had been damaged in a storm weeks earlier, and Jake had been meaning to repair it, but had never found the time. Jake raised his hands, palms outward, in what he hoped was a universal gesture of peace. He spoke slowly and clearly, even though he knew she could not understand him. He told her that she was safe, that he had found her at the crash site and brought her here to help. He explained that he was alone on the station and that he meant her no harm. Her eyes never left his face as he spoke, and though she could not understand his words, something in his tone seemed to calm her. Over the following days, Jake did everything he could to make her comfortable. He brought her food, though she seemed unable to eat most of what the station provided. He offered her water, which she accepted gratefully. He showed her around the station, keeping his movements slow and non-threatening. She watched him with curious eyes as he went about his daily routines. Sometimes he caught her studying the various instruments and displays with an intelligence that reminded him she was clearly from an advanced civilization. The breakthrough came when Jake was working on repairing the universal translator. She had been watching him from across the room as he struggled with the delicate circuitry. Suddenly, she stood and approached him slowly. She pointed to the device and then to herself, making a series of gestures that seemed to indicate she understood what he was trying to do. Jake handed her the tool he had been using and watched in amazement as she began to work on the translator with movements that were both precise and confident. Within minutes, she had the device operational again. The first words that came through the translator were an apology. She explained that her name was Lyra and that she was a researcher from the Andorian Collective. Her ship had been damaged in a space storm, and she had crashed on this planet while trying to reach a safe harbor. She had been terrified when she first saw Jake, because her people had been taught that humans were a violent and unpredictable species. Jake laughed at this revelation, explaining that humans often thought the same thing about themselves. He told her about his own mission on the planet and about the loneliness he had been feeling. Lyra listened with growing fascination as Jake described human culture and society. She seemed particularly interested in the concept of humor and made him repeat several jokes until she understood why they were funny. As the days passed, Jake and Lyra fell into a comfortable routine. She helped him with his research using her advanced knowledge of xenobiology to provide insights he never would have discovered on his own. In return, he shared his knowledge of human culture and helped her understand the peculiarities of his species. They spent long hours talking about their respective worlds and the differences between their peoples. Jake learned that Lyra was considered young by her people's standards, though she was actually older than he was. Her species lived for centuries, and she had spent most of her life in academic pursuits. She had never been away from her homeworld for more than a few months at a time, and had never encountered another intelligent species before meeting Jake. Her crash on this planet was actually her first solo research mission. The revelation that changed everything came during a routine maintenance check on the station's environmental systems. Jake had been working in the lower levels where the humidity was particularly high. When he returned to the main level, he was soaked with perspiration and condensation. Lyra took one look at him and immediately began to show signs of distress. She backed away from him, her eyes wide, with what appeared to be fear or disgust. Jake was confused and hurt by her reaction. He had thought they had moved past her initial fear of him. He tried to approach her to ask what was wrong, but she continued to back away. Finally, in frustration, he went to the supply closet and grabbed a towel. He began to dry himself off, roughly scrubbing at his hair and face. When he looked up, he saw that Lyra was staring at him with an expression he had never seen before. Slowly, she approached him, her eyes fixed on the towel in his hands. She reached out tentatively and touched the fabric with one finger. When Jake offered it to her, she took it reverently, holding it as if it were made of precious metal. She brought it to her face and inhaled deeply. Then she looked at Jake with tears streaming down her cheeks. Through the translator, her voice was barely a whisper. She explained that in her culture, the sharing of absorbent materials was the most intimate gesture possible. It was something that was only done between life partners or the closest of family members. The fact that Jake had offered her his towel without hesitation meant more to her than any words could express. It was a gesture of trust and intimacy that transcended cultural boundaries. Jake stood frozen as Lyra continued to explain the significance of what had just happened. In her society, water was sacred, and the tools used to manage it were considered extensions of one's soul. By offering her his towel, Jake had essentially offered her a piece of himself. The casual way he had done it without any expectation of reciprocation showed a generosity of spirit that her people valued above all else. Lyra carefully folded the towel and held it against her chest. She looked at Jake with an expression that was part gratitude, part wonder, and part something else that he could not quite identify. She told him that she had been taught that humans were selfish and violent, but his simple act of kindness had shown her that everything her people believed about humanity was wrong. Jake felt his cheeks burn with embarrassment. He had simply been trying to clean himself up and had offered her the towel without thinking. The idea that such a simple gesture could have such profound meaning in her culture was both humbling and overwhelming. He tried to explain that he had meant no offense and that he had simply been trying to be helpful. Lyra smiled at his obvious discomfort. She explained that there was no offense taken, quite the opposite. She said that his unconscious generosity made the gesture even more meaningful. It showed that kindness was so natural to him that he did not even think about it. This was the highest compliment that could be paid to someone in her culture. The relationship between Jake and Lyra changed after that day. There was a new depth to their interactions, a sense of connection that went beyond mere friendship. Lyra began to share more personal details about her life and her people. She told Jake about her family and her dreams for the future. She spoke of her fear that she would never see her home again, and her growing attachment to both the planet and to Jake himself. Jake found himself looking forward to their conversations more than anything else in his day. Lyra's perspective on the universe was so different from his own that every discussion opened up new ways of thinking. She challenged his assumptions about life and consciousness and helped him see his own species from an outside perspective. Her insights into human nature were often more accurate than anything he had ever heard from a human psychologist. As weeks turned into months, the possibility of rescue began to seem less and less likely. Lyra's ship had been destroyed beyond repair, and the nearest Endorian outpost was light years away. Jake had sent out distress signals, but the remote location of the research station made it unlikely that anyone would find them soon. Rather than despair, however, both Jake and Lyra began to accept that they might be spending a very long time together. The acceptance of their situation brought with it a new level of intimacy. They began to share their deepest fears and hopes with each other. Jake told Lyra about his family back on Earth and his dreams of becoming a xenobiologist. Lyra shared her own ambitions and the pressure she felt to live up to her people's expectations. They discovered that despite their different origins, they had much in common. One evening, as they sat watching the bioluminescent display in the forest outside the station, Lyra turned to Jake with a serious expression. She told him that she had been thinking about the towel incident and what it meant for their relationship. She said that in her culture, when someone accepted such a gift, it created a bond that was considered sacred. She wanted to know if Jake understood what that meant and if he was prepared for the responsibilities that came with it. Jake considered her words carefully. He had grown to care for Lyra deeply, and the thought of being bonded to her was not unpleasant. But he also understood that she was asking him to make a commitment that went beyond anything he had experienced before. He told her that he was honored by her consideration, but that he needed to understand exactly what such a bond would entail. Lyra explained that in her culture, the bond created by sharing absorbent materials was one of mutual support and protection. It meant that they would be responsible for each other's well-being, and that they would face whatever challenges lay ahead together. It was not exactly marriage, as humans understood it, but it was a form of partnership that was considered unbreakable. Jake looked into Lyra's luminous eyes and saw his own feelings reflected there. He realized that somewhere along the way he had fallen in love with this remarkable being. The cultural differences between them seemed insignificant compared to the connection they had forged. He told her that he would be honored to accept such a bond, and that he could not imagine facing the future without her by his side. The ceremony that followed was simple but profound. Lyra produced a small container of water from her homeworld that she had managed to save from the crash. She and Jake each dipped their hands in the water, and then dried them with the same towel that had started it all. As they did so, Lyra spoke words in her native language that the translator rendered as vows of mutual support and protection. Jake felt a strange warmth spread through his chest as they completed the ceremony. He could not tell if it was purely emotional or if there was something more mystical at work. Either way, he felt a connection to Lyra that was unlike anything he had ever experienced. She smiled at him with tears in her eyes and told him that they were now bonded in a way that would last for the rest of their lives. The months that followed were the happiest of Jake's life. He and Lyra worked together on their research, making discoveries that would revolutionize both human and Andorian understanding of xenobiology. They explored the planet together, finding wonders that neither could have discovered alone. Most importantly, they supported each other through the challenges of their isolation, creating a home together in the most unlikely of places. When the rescue ship finally arrived, Jake and Lyra faced a difficult decision. The Andorian vessel had come in response to Lyra's distress beacon and was prepared to take her home. But Jake could not leave his post, and Lyra was reluctant to abandon the life they had built together. After much discussion, they decided that Lyra would return to her people to report on her discoveries, but that she would come back to Jake as soon as possible. The parting was painful, but both Jake and Lyra knew that their bond was strong enough to survive the separation. As Lyra's ship disappeared into the starlit sky, Jake touched the towel that had started it all and smiled. He had learned that sometimes the simplest gestures could have the most profound consequences, and that love could bloom in the most unexpected places. The universe was vast and full of wonders, but he had found the greatest wonder of all in the eyes of an alien girl who had taught him the true meaning of kindness.